Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time Beauregard moved to the Western Theater and began to concentrate Confederate forces near Corinth, Mississippi. Now we see Beauregard fight the Battle of Shiloh. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Albert Sidney Johnston gave Beauregard free rein to write up the marching plans and attack plan that would result in the Battle of Shiloh. However, like his orders wrote up for what became the First Battle of Manassas, they were convoluted and probably some of them didn't get delivered properly. This led to miscommunication and starts and stops for the Fourth Corps of the Confederate Army of the Mississippi as it slowly moved toward Ulysses S. Grant's army. The Georgian William J. Hardee commanded the corps that was to be in front. Braxton Bragg, the man who Louisiana offered command of its troops as opposed to Beauregard, commanded another corps, which would make up the second line. The warrior bishop of the Confederacy, Leonidas Polk, commanded the corps that made up the third line, and John C. Breckinridge, the former vice president of the United States and presidential hopeful in the 1860 election, commanded the reserve corps. When the Army of the Mississippi got within 2 miles of the Federal position, Beauregard was upset that the march hadn't gone the way he hoped. He even said that he should have moved back to Corinth, but Johnston stepped in and told the men they would attack the next morning, April 6th. Beauregard forgot to order his tent set up and instead spent the night in an ambulance wagon. Around 5 in the morning, the Confederates made contact with the enemy, and Beauregard still advocated for withdrawing. Johnston refused to hear it and instructed Beauregard to remain in the rear and coordinate troop movements. Almost immediately, the battle lines became chaos as the left moved faster than the right. Some obstinate Federals made a stand in a place later called the Hornet's Nest. Heavy fighting broke out all across the front as the attacking columns began to spread out over the battlefield. Beauregard moved forward with the army as the rebels pushed the Yankees further back to Petersburg Landing. A little after 3 p.m., Beauregard received word that Johnston had been hit and died shortly after, leaving him in command of the whole army. He urged his corps commanders to keep pressing the attack, but eventually they ran into a solid defensive line thrown together by Grant on the bluffs of Petersburg Landing. A few attacks were made against the Yankee defenses, but the Confederates were too scattered to cause any great damage, so Beauregard recalled his troops, having them withdraw back to the captured Union camps for the night. He believed he could easily defeat the Union army the next day. Beauregard sent a message to President Davis in Richmond, telling him of a complete victory. Davis told the Confederate Congress that the Federal Army had been practically destroyed. The next morning, the Federals, reinforced by Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio, attacked the poorly organized Confederates. Despite the weakened state of the Confederate Army, they held up well against the Union advance, but the rebel spirit had been drained out of them by heavy fighting the previous day and the apparent loss after believing they had won from the day before. On 2 occasions, Beauregard led regiments in an attack. When an officer advised against such an action, Beauregard said, "The order must now be follow, not go." An aide made a comment to Beauregard that, "General, do you not think our troops are very much in the condition of a lump of sugar thoroughly soaked with water, but yet preserved in its original shape, though ready to dissolve? Would it not be judicious to get away with what we have?" Beauregard replied, "I intend to withdraw in a few moments." Beauregard's army scampered back to Corinth, dismayed at the loss of ground and supplies. Despite the setback, Beauregard wrote glowingly of the battle and campaign, writing that he had so much bloodied the enemy that they could not pursue, and that the only regret was that he wasn't able to bring away all of the captured supplies. At Corinth, Earl Van Dorn and his command joined Beauregard, who attested with Van Dorn's help he could give the Yankees another good drumming. A rebel soldier relayed a story of Beauregard's time in Corinth. Beauregard rode through the army's camps and asked the men how they were holding up. When he spotted a man with a bandage on his head, he extended his hand and asked, "My brave friend, were you wounded?" Then, realizing he had asked an obvious question, he added, "Never mind, I trust you will soon be well. Before long we will make the Yankees pay up, interest and all. The day of our glory is near." As Beauregard rode away, after gracefully bowing to the crowd, A shout such as Napoleon might have heard from the lips of the guard went up. "Hurrah for Beauregard, our chief!" It is strange, Pa, how we love that little black Frenchman, but there is not a man in the army who would not willingly die in following his lead. In some circles, Beauregard was not thought of as fondly. Rumors swirled that during the battle he was confined to his tent or an ambulance, overcome with melancholy. One story stated that Beauregard went insane and stayed at his quarters fondling a pheasant. That story came from the fact that a soldier found a pheasant cowering in the brush during the April 6th attack, captured it, and gave it to Beauregard as a present. Thinking he would give it to a friend in Jackson, Tennessee, he had the animal caged. During the attack on April 7th, the bird was lost. Union General Henry Halleck came from his headquarters in Missouri to take control of the Union armies at Pittsburg Landing and push south to Corinth. Those armies moved at a glacial pace toward Beauregard's position, taking about a month to travel the roughly 20 miles to Corinth. Beauregard attempted to defeat sections of the juggernaut of an army group on 2 occasions, but during both, miscommunication and other problems allowed the Union command to withdraw without serious damage. Outnumbered and worried about the vulnerability of Corinth's position, Beauregard ordered the evacuation of the town. To accomplish this, he created an elaborate ruse. Bands were left behind to play and make a lot of noise. They would also play reveille as though all the troops were there. Then trains with empty cars ran into and out of town, blowing their whistles. The ruse worked, and Beauregard was able to move all of his troops out of Corinth and to Tupelo, Mississippi. With Corinth evacuated, Fort Pillow on the Mississippi was ordered evacuated by Beauregard. Confederate territory in the Western Theater quickly fell into Union hands as Beauregard gave ground. This angered President Jefferson Davis, who sent Albert Sidney Johnston's son to essentially interrogate Beauregard with a series of questions from the president. Davis wanted Beauregard removed from his position, and when John C. Pemberton, the commander of coastal defenses at Charleston, South Carolina, was seen as unable to manage the task, Beauregard was recommended as his replacement. This thrilled Davis because this would be an easy way to get rid of Beauregard, simply transfer him. It was suggested to Beauregard that the sea air would help his throat ailment that he suffered from. However, Beauregard insisted that his place was with the Army of the Mississippi. For weeks, his medical officer insisted that he get rest to restore his vitality. Finally, he gave in and left Tupelo destined for a resort north of Mobile. He left Braxton Bragg in charge of the army in his absence. He took his leave without informing the government and without getting approval for such a move. His action was strange and ill-advised. Here was the commander of the largest field army in the West, whose health was so bad that temporarily he could not perform his duties, proposing to give up his command and to designate another officer as his successor, and all this without a word of explanation to his superiors. Neither step should have been taken until after the foolish conference with Richmond. He was playing directly into the president's hands. Davis found out about this break in military rules when he broke with military etiquette. He sent a telegram to Bragg ordering him to take command of the forces around Jackson, Mississippi. Bragg, knowing that Beauregard was putting him in charge of the army in his absence, handed the telegram to Beauregard. Beauregard was insulted by this break in the chain of command, contacting his subordinate directly instead of going through the proper channels, and he telegraphed Davis saying that Bragg couldn't take command of the troops around Jackson because he had to take command of the army temporarily. Beauregard then informed Davis that he was going to be leaving the army for an unspecified amount of time and to an unspecified location, claiming he needed a short rest. The next day, he gave a more detailed statement of why he was leaving and to where, but didn't ask for permission. He just informed the administration of the leave he was taking. When Bragg wired Davis that Beauregard had left and he needed instructions, Davis jumped at the chance to get rid of Beauregard. Beauregard was already at the Alabama resort when he found out from a telegram from Bragg that he had been replaced. Beauregard spent the summer of 1862 conducting a war of words from the resort and Mobile against President Davis. In one of his many letters to congressmen and newspaper editors, Beauregard wrote, "I believe you are right in your suppositions relative to the order relieving me of command of the department, but I shall make no effort to resume it. If the country be satisfied to have me laid on the shelf by a man who is either demented or a traitor to his high trust, well, let it be so. I require rest, and will endeavor meanwhile by study and reflection to fit myself better for the darkest hours of our trial which I foresee are yet to come. As to my reputation, if it can suffer by anything that living specimen of gall and hatred can do, why it is not worth preserving. And as to glory, you know what Byron and myself think on that subject. I am annoyed to death now by having everybody looking at me wherever I go like a wild beast. My consolation is that the difference between that individual and myself is that if he were to die today, the whole country would rejoice at it, whereas I believe if the same thing were to happen to me, they would regret it. It was September before he received his next assignment, the commander of the Department of South Carolina and Georgia, with his headquarters at Charleston, South Carolina. His military acumen as far as leading armies is debatable, but he was an excellent engineer. Organizing and redesigning the fortifications of Charleston and Savannah, Georgia, allowed the general to demonstrate his skills. Charleston embodied the rebellion, and it became a target for the Union to capture, not only for its symbolism, but for its vital harbor that allowed resources to come into the Confederacy. Beauregard built up his forces and constructed impressive works to guard against an impending attack. Even with his hands full, he continued to play in politics as well as diplomacy. He kept on attacking the Davis administration by criticizing the President and the War Department. He also defended his retreat from Corinth and the defeat at Shiloh. When he heard about the invasion of Kentucky by Bragg and the Army of the Mississippi, Beauregard's old command, he hoped that Bragg would win a victory and supplant himself on the Ohio River, threatening the Midwestern states. Beauregard called on the governors of various Confederate states to call on the governors of the Midwestern states to form their own confederacy, or convince those Union states to call on Abraham Lincoln for peace, allowing those states to have access to the Mississippi River. One of Beauregard's biographers explained the importance of this moment. Beauregard's thinking on the subject showed mental growth. He had come to realize that war is never wholly military, but is also partly political, and that the Confederacy might not be able to win a military decision. The defect in his proposal was the fantastic notion of having it executed by the governors, the same fault that plagued his military planning. His bold notion of bypassing the central government could not have raised him in favor at Richmond. In January 1863, Beauregard scored a significant victory. When a Union gunboat went up the Stono River like it regularly did, Beauregard was ready and hid away artillery pieces, and when the boat halted on the river, the Confederate guns opened up and forced it to surrender. Beauregard added this captured piece to his naval fleet. Beauregard scored another victory in January when he noticed the Union ironclads left the outskirts of Charleston Harbor, leaving only wooden ships. Beauregard sent in 2 of his own ironclads and severely damaged the Union vessels and sent them scampering away. After that engagement, he declared the blockade around Charleston over, but he was presumptuous. The Union ironclads and other ships returned, and the blockade continued. In April, the Union at Port Royal sent 9 ironclad vessels to reduce Fort Sumter to rubble, but as they slowly approached the fort, the multiple fortifications around Charleston opened up on the Union fleet, sending over 2,000 rounds at the Federals. Around 500 hit their mark, damaging them enough that they had no choice but to turn around and return to Port Royal. Beauregard gave the Confederacy a significant morale boost by turning back the fleet and keeping Charleston secure.